Hey team, I'm going to quickly run through the couple parts of FRQ that we're focusing on today. So 2B with graphing and then 2C with experimental results. Ooh, I went a little too far with that one. Um, cool. So, um, here we go. We're going to talk about this rubric actually in just a second. I want to talk about this slide first before we even get into the rubric. So remember that we talked really quickly the other day about how you need to choose whether your graph in this section is going to be discrete data or it's going to be continuous data, and that will determine whether you are using a bar or line graph. Sometimes it's really obvious, sometimes it's not quite as obvious, but you will lose a point if you do not graph the correct way. So I want to just make sure that we're really clear on this. So on the left, this is discrete data because favorite instrument, these are groups, right? And sometimes groups can be numbers, which can be confusing. But if we have groups, right, categories, that's our discrete data, and that's where we use a bar graph. Okay. And then continuous is going to be, of course, time. So you can see at the bottom, December 2011, 2012, 2013. Even here, December 2011, June 2012, December 2012. Even here, something to notice is that this almost looks like they could be categories, but this is referring to over time, right? So this would still be a line graph. And temperature is the one that gets confusing sometimes. So air density versus temperature is this graph right here. And see the temperature is at the bottom. Temperature is considered continuous, okay? Unless they give you like 5 random temperatures that feel like groups, right? But a lot of times they'll give you like 20, 30, 40, 50, right? It's continuous. So you need to make sure that you use a line graph. And I think this is why some of us chose to do a bar graph in the example we're going to look at. Okay. Cool. So this was the rubric from 2B for graphing. So remember, axes need to be properly labeled and scaled. That was 1 point. Okay. You got another point for your line graph with accurately plotted points. So if you did a bar graph, you didn't get a point for the plotted points being correct. If you did a bar graph, so just be careful with that. And then the third point was error bars of appropriate magnitude. So you had to have your error bars. Okay. Cool. So let's take a look at some examples and see if we can figure out where people lost points. So go ahead and throw this in. Did the student earn all 3 points? Okay, this student did not earn all 3 points, and they lost their points because carbon fixation actually does not have, if you notice, your carbon fixation doesn't have units. Ooh, that's fun, my fireworks. Carbon fixation does not have units, which means you would not get the point for neither the labeling, but also within that point is the scale, right? This also did not start at 0 on the y-axis, okay? You can start at 0 and then use the break, which will look like some squiggly lines. You can use that. However, you need to make sure that you're still starting at 0. So they actually wouldn't have gotten that point either way, even if they had the units, because the scale is wrong. Only because it starts at 0. It does go by 5s, which is great. And then the other piece of this that we need to look at is, yes, it's a line graph. Yes, it looks like these are plotted correctly if we look at them. The error bars look like they're maybe appropriate, but maybe not perfect. Honestly, because this is Nearpod and it was a little tricky to get this super exact, I gave this student the point there, so they earned a 2 out of 3. Okay. Great. So go ahead and try to score this sample. Okay. So this student, this student has a graph that looks really nice. It's clear they know how to graph, but they are missing units here in carbon fixation. They are also, so they didn't get the point for the axes being labeled, and it's a bar graph, not a line graph. So they actually only earned the point for their error bars. Okay. Cool. What about this one? What would you score it? Okay, great. So this person did get the axes labeled correctly because they have their units, and they also have their scale looks good, but they did use bar graph instead of line. Their error bars do look good. So this person got 2 out of 3 points. So they got their scale and axes labeled and their error bars. Okay. What about this student? What would you give them and why? Where did they lose points? Okay. This student also earned a 1 out of 3. So they lost 2 points, and they lost their points by not having units on their temperature, but also their scale. It looks like they tried to do a break here, but your break has to go up from 0 to 40, okay, and show on this line what's going on. And then they also lost a point because they don't have their error bars, okay? And even though this is a little off, excuse me, in terms of like the scale, it's still, they do have their temperatures here, which is great. On your x-axis, you can actually start wherever it starts. So at 25, I believe it was, you can just start there. And the error bars were not there, so they earned a 1 out of 3. Okay. And then this is the last one, sample 4. What did this student earn and where did they lose points? Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. This should be sample 4. Okay, great. So this is our student that earned all of the points. So notice, I said this earlier, but they didn't start at 0 in terms of the temperature. That's okay. If this is time, it's not okay, but you can start at whatever data point when it comes to temperature. They have their scale correct then, because they also have a break here. So instead of starting at 0, they did this like little break that shows that the 50, right, is kind of where they're starting. You could have started the 50 on the second line even, but you have to show that break. They might take a point off here because they didn't actually write 0, but this is usually acceptable as long as you have the break there, okay? And they have their units, great, okay? So hopefully you guys felt good with that. So I want to give you guys an acronym that I actually learned from another AP Bio teacher. That's talks. Okay, so you want to make sure that your graph talks. What does that mean? T is for title. This actually isn't a point, but it is a good thing to remember normally in a graphing situation that you want to make sure you have your title. Your axes need to be labeled, okay, with units. The L stands for line or bar graph, and then actually plotting your points as well as error bars. The K is for key if needed. Okay, so if you have multiple groups that you have to make sure get graphed, then you might need your key. And then scale, obviously, you need to make sure that you have an appropriate scale, okay? So this is kind of like a checklist to make sure that you get all the points on your graph. So y'all are gonna go and actually practice right now your graphing. So you're gonna handwrite this in your notebook, okay? There is a link to some graphing paper. If you have graphing paper, you can use that, but you can also use, and I'll put the link actually in the this link to the graphing paper. I will put in your Edpuzzle as well, so you can either print it or you can use line paper for today. But please do get some graphing paper, and if you don't have it, I can provide some. You can come to school and I can hand it off to you. But for today, you can use line paper, and then you're just pasting a picture. Okay, so go ahead and do that now. It's going to take you a few minutes. Okay, great. And then next, we are going to talk really quickly about the other part of the mock exam that we're going to look at today. So 2B2 is kind of what it's called, but this is the second part of 2B, which asks you to determine whether there is a statistical difference or not between two groups, okay, in the dependent variable, so the amount of carbon dioxide fixed by Rubisco. And they specifically say between 30 and 40. So why is there no statistical difference? Why should that be what's in the rubric? Go ahead and jot that in. Okay, so the reason is that if we look at this graph, okay, and you look at 30 and 40, so 30 and 40, okay, there is no statistical difference because these two error bars, I know that that's probably getting a little bit, these two error bars, okay, for 30 and for 40, these two error bars do overlap, which means there's no statistically significant difference between them, okay? That's all that means. So when you're asked to determine whether there's a statistical difference, you just have to say there is a statistical difference or there is not, okay? And it's based on the overlap of the error bars, okay? And this is the same slide. And then for 2C, so we're not going to practice this. Sorry, you guys are going to do this, but we're not going to practice this just because it is pretty simple. But if you have questions, you can feel free to throw those in at the end. And then 2C is always going to be some type of data analysis. This is usually describe an effect. So describe the effect on this independent variable on the dependent variable. Okay. So a lot of times you just have to say it increases, it decreases, it stays the same. This increases by, you could even be specific, increases by 10 degrees or something like that, right? On this mock exam, they said identify the temperature at which the soybeans leaves are producing the lowest amount of carbohydrate. So in this case, they actually told you to identify the temperature instead of describe an effect, which is actually even easier. So identify the temperature. Well, you could have said 45, you could have said 46, you could have said 47, 48, 49, you could have said 49.5, but you had to make sure it was something between 45 and 50. Okay, that was it. Okay, cool. So which of, I believe that some people got a question that looked more like it said identify the temperature range. So if you're thinking about that, which student earned the points here, student 1 or student 2? Yeah, so this is pretty easy. Of course, this should be student 2. So hopefully that was helpful. Y'all are going to move on to now doing your kind of rewrite of the FRQ using your mock number 2. And I'll talk more about that to all of you in a minute.